Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we review books of every genre, looking for the best of fun escapist books. Today we're doing a juvenile fiction, a fantasy for probably upper elementary, middle school age, called On the Edge of the Dark Sea of Darkness, which is an interesting title, by Andrew Peterson. This is the first book of a Wing Feather saga. There's apparently also some sort of TV series animated. I've never seen it, can't comment on that. So, this is a story about a family of 3 children, their mother and grandfather, who live in a world that is being oppressed because sometime when the kids were infants, thereabouts, the country, the continent, somewhere like that, has been taken over by some ruthless lizard people called fangs. And so the fangs are kind of ruling the roost, so to speak. And the Igby family, which is what our main characters are living under that oppression, kind of in their own, doing their own little thing. And they get in trouble. They get noticed by some of the local fangs. And it keeps kind of coming up where they do something that gets noticed by the fangs and then get in trouble and kind of have to get out of trouble and sometimes have to run away or be rescued, or it's very much an action type of thing. Then in this fantasy world, the fangs are looking for something. We'll say not the immediate fangs, but like the government way off distance, looking for something. And it turns out the Igby's might have some information about that. And so they start hunting the Igby's down seriously, and so the Igby's are gonna have to try and escape that attention. Okay, that's a very rough estimate on what's going on. Mostly it is kind of the immediate adventures that the children get into. It's very much children-centric. They're the main characters in this. Mostly the 2 older boys. They have a younger sister who is there, but not the main focus. Okay. That gets it for the plot, which maybe isn't very in-depth because there's a lot going on, and so it's kind of hard to give a detailed description without having too much detail. But that gives you a good enough idea. Okay, so some things I like. So one thing I like is the world building. So this is definitely a book with a lot of world building. So I've already talked about the lizard people, the fangs that are the bad guys. So one example of that world building would be the fangs themselves. If they get killed, which they do in this book, there is some death of bad guys. And then within a couple of hours, they basically have decomposed to dust, which is a nice thing, actually, because in a story, if a lot of bad guys are dying, there's no gore involved because they just basically, you come back later and the bodies have all pretty much vanished. So I did like that about this story. That was one of those world building things that was really facilitated the story to not be too harsh for children. There's lots of other world building, mostly in the creatures, the critters. There's lots of variety of critters that the author came up with. Some of them are meant to be humorous. For example, they have cave blats. And they're called that not because they themselves live in caves, but because when you meet one, you immediately want to find a cave to get away from it. Or there's toothy cows, which apparently are really bad because we never run into one. But there's thwops that come in the garden and try and destroy gardens. They're like little pixies. Little people, gnomes almost. You kind of get the impression that Grandpa is constantly trying to capture and rid the garden of. So there's humor. I like the humor. That would be, for example, with the thwops that I just mentioned. Grandpa is constantly trying to capture them and then immediately release them in a rival's garden. Like, he has too much good vegetables, let's release a thwop secretively in his garden to make his life more miserable. That'll teach him. So there's a humor going on there. So I like that. Another example of, I think it's kind of meant to be humorous, but it's more meant for children's juvenile sense of humor, but is the mom needs to make what they call maggot loaf for the Fangs. So she's basically bribing the Fangs to not pay attention to her family by making maggot loaf. And maggot loaf is just as bad as it sounds. So for example, they get out a piece of day-old fish and bury it in the manure pile, and 3 days later come dig it up, and whatever state it's in, that goes in the maggot loaf, and the Fangs think it's wonderful. Any gross thing you could think of that they try to find to put in this maggot loaf. And that kind of appeals to a kid's sense of humor. And again, helps with the world building. So I liked both of those. I like the family emphasis. So repeatedly this talks about the idea of older siblings taking care of younger siblings. You need to watch out for them, protect them. The idea that parents are to be listened to, the idea that family comes first, that they're the most important thing, etc., etc. This is very family-oriented. This is not the kind of kid-centric book where the kids know all the right answers and the parents are ignorant idiots. This is, parents are doing their best, but it's focused on kids anyway, which I like about that. I didn't come away feeling this undermines parental authority, which some children's books do. So I did like that. The action plot. So this is a story with lots of adrenaline moments. This is if you think of girl-centric being relationship and guy-centric being action, this is very much a boy book. This is all about the action. They're constantly getting into scrapes of some variety or other, getting into imminent peril, and then having to escape that. And so this can be the kind of thing that somebody who really likes the action, the adrenaline, the constant pacing of that kind of thing would like this book. The ending is good as well. It has a very satisfying ending. There are questions that the kids have about their missing dad and about what's going on with the Fangs, like why exactly are the Fangs after them? What is it that they have that the Fangs seem to be after? Those are questions that come up in the story and have a satisfying answer at the end. I liked the ending of this book. It is the first book in a series, and you can tell because it ends on the Igby's are about to embark on a journey. And I won't give more details than that because I don't want to spoil it, but it doesn't feel like it's a cliffhanger ending for the ending of the book itself. And I appreciated that. So if you read just one, you would feel like this is a good enough place to end and never read the next book. It works out fine like that. I like that. Although it does obviously very clearly lead into book 2. Okay, some things I dislike. So I mentioned that it's an action-packed, very fast-paced book. I would say I think it's actually too fast-paced. So the book takes place over the course of 4 days, and the Igby boys especially are in mortal peril like a dozen times. It just seems like they're constantly, we're gonna die, the teeth are closing in on his throat and, a sword right at his neck, and the hounds are baying at the door, and the fire is just about there, and over and over and over. It gets to be a little bit too much, I think. A little bit, it needed a little bit slower pacing to balance out some of that frantic endangerment that constantly happens in this. At least that's my opinion. The pacing also, it has constant cliffhangers. So the chapters are not very long. Sometimes they're only a couple pages, sometimes they're 4 pages. Like this one, The Horned Hounds, is all of 2 pages long, before it's the next, it's not very long chapters, but almost all the chapters end on a cliffhanger. My youngest son, so I'm reading this to my kids. I read this to my kids. My youngest son actually started getting frustrated with that. He was like, not another cliffhanger. And it didn't end up feeling like, wow, I really want to hear what's going on next. I can't wait to get back to the story. It ended up just being like, oh, this is too much. So I felt that there was too much of that. At least my kids were getting frustrated with it. It felt, because of the constant action, the constant danger, the frantic pacing, and the constant cliffhangers, it kind of felt overwhelming. My kids actually wanted other stories in between sometimes before I finished this book. Kind of, like read some poetry or read something that's, a comic strip or something that's calmer for a while. So I wouldn't say that the frantic pacing was a good thing. There are some illogical choices, some things where my kids are like, you are being an idiot. Like, the kids see an old rundown manor and they're like forbidden to go into it, but they sneak in anyway. Actually, I'm not sure that they were actually actively forbidden. They just knew they probably shouldn't go in that area of the world. Any case, they weren't actually disobeying parents, I don't think. Again, this was kind of more family friendly in that respect. But they still did something stupid. Like, one kid is like, we shouldn't go into the forbidden forest kind of idea. I don't think it's called forbidden forest, but you get the idea. And the other kid is like, I'm curious. I want to go anyway. And so he goes, even though it's dangerous, and they knew it was going to be dangerous. And of course, it ends up being dangerous when they're there. And my kids watching this are like, why are you being so stupid? Don't do that. That kind of thing. So when your kids are basically yelling at the story of, that's a stupid decision, you know that the characters are not making smart choices. Because kids are not always so brilliant at the foreshadowing or expectation of what danger is going to come. But it was very obvious that it wasn't a very good decision. So I don't actually like that in books when it becomes really obvious your characters are doing something stupid. Yeah. Lack of character development. Because this is not a book that is character driven, you end up feeling like, at least I did at the end, that I didn't fall in love with the characters. I don't really care about them enough to really want to see, more of their lives. There's no character growth, like no characters change over the course of this book. It does kind of end with the expectation that there will be character growth in the future, but you don't see it in this book. And I can't say I loved that. I think it needed a little bit more focus on the characters. I do think that, it just could have been better in that respect. So I'll say my kids' opinion first, before I give my opinion of these books. So my oldest child, both my kids are upper elementary, and so my oldest child he gave it a thumbs up, but not an enthusiastic thumbs up. I was kind of like, so did you like this book? Did you not like it? He's kind of like, yeah, I liked it. Like, would you recommend it to somebody? Yeah, I'd recommend it. That was kind of his response. It was yes, but not enthusiastic. My second child, who is autistic, he was the one that didn't like the cliffhangers, and he's the one that, doesn't necessarily love tension and, endangering characters, that kind of thing. I asked him his opinion. He was kind of like, meh. And that was word for word, I quoted right there. That was his response, meh. So he thought it was just okay. And trying to pry some deeper information about this out of both of them, and I don't get much response. But I don't think... I get the impression that if I never read a sequel to them, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't be like, wow, I really want to read the next book. If I did read it to them, they'd be like, okay, I guess we can do that. Although I think my second child would be a little bit more hesitant. He'd be like, oh, okay. Because he was not terribly enthusiastic about this. So because of my overall opinion and the kids' overall opinion, I'm going to give this one an okay. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't phenomenal. I didn't love it enough. I am probably not going to read the second book to my kids. If they wanted to read it on their own, which I doubt they would, but if they did, I wouldn't object to it. I think it would be perfectly okay, not the kind of book that I felt like I would need to read and preview ahead of time, but I didn't enjoy it, and I don't think my kids would choose to do the second book on their own. So that's my overall opinion of that particular book. I will say thank you for watching, and please join me next week.